Let's talk about the implications for U.S. national security. Joining me from Austin, Texas, is House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mike McCaul. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Good evening, Brett.
Let's start with specific threats to the U.S., in the U.S. or abroad.
We do not have any specific or credible threats to the United States, but I would argue that the Paris attack was very sophisticated, very pre-planned, coordinated attack, and we had virtually no warnings about that either. So you don't know what you don't know. I'll tell you what I do know about what's happening in the United States is over the last year, we've arrested over 70 ISIS followers in the United States. That's more than one per week. We have active investigations in all 50 states and 900 cases taking place as I speak. This is a foreign fighter threat. The person who traveled to the region to travel in Syria and Iraq and go back to Europe or possibly the United States. There are 5,000 of these foreign fighters now currently in Europe. That is a visa waiver countries, and we've had hundreds of Americans travel to the region, and 50 of those have come back to the United States. So that is the threat that Paris, we saw happen in Paris. I don't want to see that threat play out in the streets of the United States.
Just to be clear, and I've heard you talk about investigations in all 50 states, the 900 cases you refer to, are those investigations of suspicious people in these states or actual operations that have happened and rounded up people?
It's a total of 900 investigations against potentially ISIS plotters and ISIS people who are radicalizing in the United States, either over the internet or foreign fighters who travel back. And so I think that's the greatest threat to the homeland right now. Let's say the FBI and Homeland have done a great job stopping most of this, but as we saw in Chattanooga, they only have to be right one time.
Yeah. Now, on the intel that you're seeing, is there a belief that it is going to spread with more of these types of coordinated attacks in other places in Europe, for example? We know that the migrant situation is very dangerous as far as those specific countries dealing with a lot of different people.
Well, you know, ISIS did state this is the beginning of the storm, in their words. I have to take them seriously at that. When you look at the Syrian refugee process, two of these terrorists actually were part of the Syrian refugee process that ISIS themselves said they want to exploit to infiltrate the West. So this causes grave concern about the whole refugee program as the President of the United States looks at bringing tens of thousands of these Syrian refugees into the United States. I would hope he would take a second look and suspend this and put a moratorium on this until we've had a better chance to see whether or not we're putting Americans at risk. I've had the FBI testify before my committee telling me that this would pose a national security risk to the American people.
Do you think that the country, the U.S., has enough manpower and facilities to be able to screen any number of these people?
Well, we have a lot of screening at last points of departure. I would argue Europe is far more wide open. They don't even check their own citizens past a watch list, and we do. There are major security gaps in Europe that we don't have in the United States. We are going to be looking at legislation responding to this. I had a team over there that just came back examining this very issue of foreign fighters and Syrian refugees that I think policymakers need to take a look at.
Yeah. Specifically, what's happening to shore up national defense here in the homeland? You have a lot of NFL games tomorrow. What's happening that you know of that's different than what had been coming into Friday?
Well, because, as you know, the concert event, the soccer stadium, a sporting event, Al-Qaeda, ISIS has a history of doing multiple attacks, but also at sporting events like the Boston bombing. So the NFL commissioner is working with Homeland Security officials, FBI, and state and locals to make sure that the games tomorrow, that we have a heightened security out there so we can protect all Americans going to these football games, because we know they do like to target sporting events.
Last thing, President Obama, in an interview with ABC before the attacks, it was taped actually on Thursday, said that he doesn't think they're gaining strength, ISIS. He says that they have them contained, basically, in Iraq and Syria in specific areas. Your reaction to that?
Well, I would just argue, if ISIS is really contained, I would hate to see what they could do if they were unleashed. I mean, Brett, they've launched 3 major external operations with great sophistication, with great capability, taking down a Russian airliner with a bomb, a suicide bomber in Lebanon killing over 40 people, and now one of the most horrific, barbaric events that we've seen, and that is these Paris attacks. I would argue that this policy of containment is not a policy to defeat and destroy ISIS, and that's what we need. All he talks about is containing the threat, not defeating and destroy it. And until we can destroy ISIS, we will continue to have this threat both in Europe, the Middle East, and the United States.
House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mike McCaul from Austin, Texas. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the time.
Thank you, Brett.